Crystar? Crystar? I believe it is called Crystar. But regardless of its pronunciation, it is a game I played recently, and to those of you curious if it's worth your time or not, well, let us talk about what worked in this game and what did not. Now, one thing I enjoy doing after I've finished a game is taking a look at its developers. I could do that before, but saving that research for after really helps to paint a better picture of the game and some insight into what it took to create it. According to the internet, Crystar was developed by a company named Gemdrops Inc. and published by FuRyu. Now, FuRyu is a publisher I know of just a little bit, as I have played The Legend of Legacy and The Alliance Alive. Gemdrops Inc., however, is a bit more foreign, as the only prior title I have played from them is Oninaki, and well, that game was utter. Anyways, being founded in 2013 means they are a fairly new company in comparison to the AAA ones many of us know today. With games taking so long to develop and coming out broken at that, I do enjoy exploring some unfamiliar territory and seeing what else is out there. Unfortunately, that is all I know about this company, but at least now, you know something too. With that background information out of the way, let us talk about what Crystar does well, at least from one random man's opinion on the internet. Starting off strong here is the story for one. To my surprise, minus the typical excessive JRPG banter, the story of Crystar is good. I did not say great, but do not worry, I will address that later. You play as a girl named Rei Hatada, and along the way you meet Kokoro, Sen, and Nanana. As you travel through Purgatory, collecting Idia to revive your sister, the game trickles the story out after every stage. Sometimes it fills in some backstory for your current party, and other times it teases you by leaving breadcrumbs to the next big scene that moves the story forward. At times, this works well in your favor, and other times, your boy just hits that skip button. The story in itself has a few twists and turns. It is nothing groundbreaking, but it is more sufficient than what the start of the game alludes to. One other thing worth mentioning about the story is the voice acting in this game. I thought it sounded pretty decent, and it was consistent throughout.
Get away! Get away from Mirai! I won't forgive you! No matter what, I'll never forgive you, Anamnesis!
Combat-wise, for the most part, is also done well. You have light attacks, heavy attacks, skills, a dodge button, you can jump, a lock-on button, and to my JoJo fans out there, even a stand. It is pretty basic run-of-the-mill type stuff, but I would not call it terrible by any means. With 4 different characters to choose from, you can always switch things up depending on what enemy or boss that you are fighting. But I will say this, maybe it's just me, but I found Kokoro to be absolute trash. Rei and Sen are just great right out the gate, while Nanana gets good later on. Kokoro, however, just was not my cup of tea. But let me not forget that this game also has some aerial combat as well. It is cool the first 20 times you do it, but it does leave something to be desired. Going into combat further, your character's stats outside of leveling up is heavily dependent on their equipment. A unique aspect of Crystar is in order to obtain this equipment, you must collect it via debuffs. Throughout the stages, you will encounter enemies with a red layer around them known as revenants. By defeating said revenant, your character will then be inflicted with a debuff that they must carry with them for the rest of that stage. So, the more debuffs you stack up, the more challenging things can get. Or one could also say tedious. But nonetheless, it is an interesting mechanic that also ties into the lore of the game. After clearing a stage, you can then cry, like literally, and transform those debuffs into your equipment, which can then power up your character. Last but not least, in the what works department, is the game's user interface. While it is not the prettiest thing in the world, what I really liked about this game was its accessibility. You always have access to everything you want before a stage, and while in a stage, it is stripped down to keep you playing and not fighting menu after menu. With that out of the way, let's touch on what did not work. My biggest gripe about this game would have to be the stages. Going into the game, I figured these stages would be randomly generated to some degree, but it turns out assuming just makes an ass out of you and me. The stages, while aesthetically pleasing, are nothing more than twists and turns up and down some stairs. The enemies group around certain rooms all together, and some treasure is sprinkled through each floor, but other than the look, each stage fails to feel any different than the last. Some form of platforming here would have helped a ton, but I digress. Next on the list that did not work well in this game was the bosses. They each have a distinct look and feel, but once again drop the ball in terms of combat. Some bosses you can literally stagger until death, while others just tank damage and repeat the same two animations over and over again. I am not saying the game needs incredibly diverse and challenging bosses, but more so just a difference in flow during these big battles. Another thing that did not work in this game was the debuff system. It was not punishing enough to the player, which in turn decreased the sense of satisfaction after completing a stage. I understand the need for balance in the game, but the debuffs felt like they were at best surface level. I just wanted to suffer through stages and barely clear them, so at the end, my literal suffering turned into some dope equipment. But sadly, that was not the case. Last but not least here would be the delivery of the story. I am aware that I mentioned the story in itself is a strength for the title, and it is. But my gripe with the story was its delivery. I am not sure if you have played Bravely Default on the 3DS or Fairy Fencer F from Compile Hearts, but if you have, it should ring a bell. Yes people, in order to artificially extend the game's length, Crystar forces you to replay a few chapters of the game 3 times in order to truly finish the game. Luckily, the fast forward button exists, but this is where the stage and equipment issue really tells on itself. It is one thing to repeat something or backtrack, but when you play the same stages over and over again with the exact same layout and enemies, it just leaves a bitter taste in one's mouth. I do not think I would be asking much if I said like, hey, could you just like flip the stage in the subsequent playthroughs so we go from the end to the start? Maybe switch the map up since the player has already gone through the stages like 5 times? Anything other than copy and paste? Absolutely not. Now, with all of that being said here, I do understand that this game is not by any means a AAA title, which is why I still enjoyed it despite its inherent flaws. Its execution could have really made this game into something greater than what it is, but it fell short by cutting some corners here and there. The game took me 22 hours to beat completely, and if you are an achievement hunter, it is fairly easy to get them all if that is your thing. But to those looking to purchase this game, I hope what I talked about here is enough to help you decide. In conclusion, to any action JRPG player out there looking for something different than the tried and true of AAA companies, then Crystar may be the game for you. Now, I do not recommend you spend $60 on this game, but if you can pick it up used or on sale via Steam like I did for about 20 bucks, then I throw the ball into your court. With a few tweaks, this game could have been more than what it is, but I will say, for what I got out of it, I am not even mad.